Good morning to one and all, and a warm welcome to the Academic Leaders Conclave on Expanding Horizons in Higher Education, which has been organized by the Guru Nanak College of Arts, Science and Commerce. I request our principal, Dr. Pushpinder Ji Bhatia, the brainchild of this conclave, to give the welcome address.
A very, very good morning to all. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. On behalf of the Guru Nanak Vidyak Society, Guru Nanak College, my staff, I extend a very, very warm welcome to Honorable Vice Chancellors, Professor Varun Sahni from the University of Goa, Professor Suhas Pednekar, our very own Vice Chancellor, University of Mumbai. It is my privilege, sir, to welcome the two of you here today. This is immediately after Republic Day, and it's a very, very special occasion to all of us over here at Guru Nanak College. I also extend a very warm welcome to all heads of departments from the University of Mumbai, principal colleagues, my own senior colleagues from different colleges, my faculty from Guru Nanak College, and some of my very good friends who are here today, all academic leaders in their own right. So Guru Nanak College celebrates her 30th year this year. The academic year 2019-20, we turned 30. And this also pleasantly coincides with the 550th birth anniversary of Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji. We celebrated this year with activities that reflected the tenets of Guru Nanak's teachings, namely selfless service, humility, love, and brotherhood. As we renew our pledge in the 30th year to develop wider landscapes for Guru Nanak College, we see that the horizons in higher education are expanding, and expanding at a very fast rate and a very fast pace. And colleges such as ours, sir, which are affiliated colleges catering to higher education, I think the challenges that we grapple with are those of balancing access, equity, and quality. Very recently, as a member of the Fulbright IAS team to the US, I think it was a consolation, sir, in many ways, to know that they have many of these challenges as well. But because of the strong economies and because of their smaller numbers, probably they can ensure quality, which we are struggling to find with our routine activities. Another concern, sir, that we have seen is our traditional system of banking education that the Brazilian educationist Paul Freire has spoken of in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which I feel is a must-read for all educationists. We are so comfortable with the banking education where knowledge is a gift which is bestowed upon the student by the teacher. Developing the critical consciousness of students is often spoken of, but how far are we able to achieve it, especially keeping in mind our large numbers? As these boundaries move further ahead, sir, we thought that we needed an interaction of this kind. We needed mentoring in Guru Nanak College especially from experts such as you, sir, Professor Sahni and Professor Pednekar. And that's how we conceptualized this academic conclave. Professor Sahni, I must tell you that I first heard him at one of the seminars, I think 4 years ago, which was on TIFAC Vision 2035. And that was the day I decided I have to invite him to our college. And it is, in fact, quite a fulfillment of a wish that you are here, sir, today. Our very own Vice Chancellor, Professor Suhas Pednekar, after becoming Vice Chancellor, again, it's a fulfillment of another desire and wish, sir, to have you with us. We look up to you as guides and mentors, and I welcome you here today to this Academic Leaders Conclave. I have the very pleasant duty of introducing our keynote speaker, Professor Sahni. Professor Varun Sahni is Vice Chancellor, Goa University. He is also professor in international politics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Currently, of course, he is on deputation. He speaks annually at the National Defense College and several times a year at the Foreign Service Institute. He has been a jury member of the Jawaharlal Nehru Award for International Understanding. An INLAC scholar, he wrote his doctoral dissertation on the political role of the Argentine Navy at the University of Oxford. He has written 105 research articles on nuclear deterrence issues, regional security, emerging balances in the Asia-Pacific, and many other Latin American issues. He has recently co-authored Technology Vision 2035 for TIFAC, the technology think tank of the Government of India. TIFAC is Technology, Information, Forecasting and Assessment Council. So he was a member of this very prestigious think tank of the Government of India. For his outstanding contribution to research and teaching, he was conferred the V.K.R.V. Rao Prize in Social Sciences for 2006 by the Indian Council of Social Science Research. From December 2008 to January 2012, he served as the 10th Vice Chancellor of the University of Jammu. So this is his second tenure as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Goa. Sir, indeed a very, very big honor to have you in our midst today. And before you can start speaking, I will request that I will invite our senior management member, Sardar Sardul Singh ji, to felicitate you. Sir, please, I invite you to felicitate our keynote speaker. I invite our administrator of Guru Nanak Vidyak Society, Mrs. Anand, to felicitate our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Suhas Pednekar. Well, without wasting any more time, I will invite our keynote speaker, Professor Varun Sahni, to start with his talk today. Thank you, sir.
Professor Suhas Pednekar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, University of Mumbai. Dr. Pushpinder Bhatia, Principal of the Guru Nanak College of Arts, Science and Commerce. Sardar Sardu Singh ji and other members of the management of the Guru Nanak Vidyak Society. Heads of departments of the University of Mumbai, principals of the various distinguished colleges of this wonderful university, faculty colleagues. A very good morning to all of you. And my apologies for having kept you waiting. The fault is not mine, it is Air India's. And Mumbai traffic, of course. We'd arranged to leave on the first flight out, sort of 7 a.m. departure, which eventually became 8:45 a.m. departure, and hence everything else then follows after that. So it's a pleasure to be here, ma'am. I think you quite accurately have portrayed your pursuit of me for the last 3.5 years, and I'm sorry that I have not been able to come on previous occasions, but I'm really happy to be here today and to be here at the time when our Vice Chancellor is here is actually, of course, very much the icing on the cake. I hadn't realized when you'd invited me that you'd expect me to speak for an hour. But when I realized that, I said that, okay, I think we probably should then have a more formal presentation in PowerPoint mode rather than to just speak for an hour. So that's what I'm proposing to do. The topic is, I think, in some ways a very challenging one. And I wanted to sort of briefly explore that and then sort of move on from that to sort of introduce you to some of the work that I have been doing with regards to the whole notion of seeing how technology, society, and education intersect with each other. So let's first explore the notion of expanding horizons. it seems to me that sort of when we think about expanding horizons, there are at least 7 features that seem to emerge that we should sort of think about, or at least in some ways, treat as a sort of starting point of our discussion. There are others, of course, but I've just restricted the list to 7. The first of them, of course, is the very fact that higher education now is a huge and growing universe, much like our universe itself is, and as has been very accurately portrayed about our country, when you think about our country, we have large numbers of everything. So, any study of India is immediately in the realm of talking about huge numbers. And I think this is really important for us when we talk about expanding horizons to use as the launching point of any real serious discussion about it, which is recognize the fact that we are very much today in the here and now, in the era of mass education. So when we talk about everything else, we talk about quality, we talk about global rankings, so on and so forth. Let's always understand that the starting point is the massification of higher education in our country, which is another way of putting it is to say that for the first time, there are Indian citizens who have access to higher education. And let us be very conscious about the fact that apart from a few elite institutions, our classrooms are filled with first-generation learners. And that therefore, it's a transformation ultimately of not just continental, but potentially, cataclysmic impact. It is transformatory in a very real sense. So that, I think, is the first of the expanding horizons that we need to be conscious about. The second, and I think this is something that we now need as teachers to come to terms with, is the ubiquity of content. That the whole notion of content somehow being king, the teacher as kind of the high priest, giving knowledge to the learner. Frankly, content delivery is no longer our core task. Although most of us are still very much tied up in the mode of content delivery. But that's really not what it's all about any longer. And the reason is that the content is everywhere. The content, so once we recognize the ubiquity of content, we understand the way in which that universe is expanding. I think we need to begin to ask some really searching questions about what it means to be a teacher. In India, but I would say globally. What does it mean to be a teacher in this technological era? And I will sort of at least give a few hints in that regard as well in the course of my presentation this morning. The third way in which I think the horizon is expanding is when we think about a whole bunch of new knowledge domains that have emerged. Some, incidentally, are not so new. But they're all there now, and they are, for better or worse, going to be driving knowledge production and therefore, by extension, knowledge transmission for the next 30, 40, 50 years. Big data, artificial intelligence, digital humanities. So I think all of us who are in the human and social sciences need to now really begin to grapple with technology and begin to ask some very searching questions of ourselves about the ways in which we have done our work and ask whether there are not other and maybe better ways of doing that work. But the cognitive sciences, which as one researcher, a very distinguished thinker in the field put it, is a field that includes everything from neurons to narratives. That all comes within the cognitive sciences and the sciences of complexity. Give you one example of science of complexity: meteorology, weather prediction. I mean, the amount of factors that go into weather prediction are so enormous that only now we are beginning to, with the technological tools that exist, begin to even start cracking the question of, weather, for example. A fourth is new connectivities. And I would like to suggest here, and the disciplines I just talked about, the emerging knowledge areas, suggest that in fact now those disciplinary divides, which by the way are the product of the 19th century German university, and then from by extension, European university. That those disciplinary divides are going to become very rapidly a thing of the past. The fact that they have not already eroded is because we are in higher education institutions extremely bureaucratic. And even when new domains of knowledge emerge, we quickly make departments out of them. Because that sort of somehow is the way we approach these things. But we have now genuine multidisciplinary endeavor, we have interdisciplinary endeavor, and we have transdisciplinary endeavor. We use these terms very loosely. Every single research project grant that you get talks about being multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, whereas the majority of them are very much anchored within certain disciplinary perspectives. So, I think that distinction itself is one we need to educate ourselves on. When we talk about multidisciplinarity, we are looking at things fundamentally in an additive way. Different disciplines, you bring them together, you're adding on. And that's additive in a way. Interdisciplinary knowledge is integrative. That's where you actually are sort of beginning to integrate disciplines. And transdisciplinary knowledge, in fact, in some fundamental senses is holistic. It's even transcending disciplines. So you begin to ask questions in a completely different way. The tragedy, as I said, is that even those areas which are particularly, conducive to this kind of research and thinking, ultimately in the university system we make departments out of them. Classic example is the field from which I come, which is area studies. When I was trying to figure out Argentina at Oxford, when I was doing my doctorate there, I was not obsessed with whether I was viewing Argentina as a political scientist or as a literary critic or as a historian or as a sociologist. I was looking at whatever information, anything I could get that could give me an understanding of that country. So that really, in some ways, is a process which is either integrative or perhaps even holistic. But yet, area studies today have become departments of their own. So you have, South Asian studies, European studies, and, we just make departments. So this is something which I think now those of us who are in kind of leadership positions in higher education really need to ask some very searching questions about. How are we going to genuinely get out of this disciplinary obsession? There are some very interesting experiments going on in universities across the country right now. We're beginning to do some rather interesting things in Goa as well. But I think this is going to be one of the core challenges, and I think we really need to come together across the universities to think about it. I think going very strongly with that is the erosion of the distinction between curricular, non-curricular, and extracurricular knowledge. This has been one of the real problems with the education system in India, not just higher education, but the education system in India. This distinction between curricular, non-curricular, and extracurricular. And I think we need to now understand that the horizon has expanded. Learning is learning. That dancing is as important as mathematics. Apologies to Mr. Xavier, who accompanied me from the airport, but dancing is as important as mathematics. And we need to now genuinely design a system which recognizes that. So if there is a learner who's very good at dancing, it's no longer some wasteful activity. To become a really good professional dancer is to have a wonderful career, remunerative, rewarding, socially contributing and enriching. When will we stop seeing dancing as being something which is done on the side and recognize that it is something which is as important as mathematics? Now, these are issues that we really need to understand. If you're really serious about this expanding horizons. The expanding horizons idea, by the way, didn't come from me. The topic of my talk was imposed upon me by the principal. So I'm just interpreting it, I'm very, very obedient that way. So say, well, what is the expanding horizon? This is the fifth way in which I think the horizon is expanding. The sixth, of course, is globalization of knowledge. That I think it makes less and less sense for us to see knowledge within the boundaries of sovereign territorial states. Knowledge is genuinely global. But it's also at the same time, and this is the big paradox, it is becoming increasingly local. So I think getting that context right is really important. There is such a thing as universal knowledge, surely. But it's a local context in which that knowledge ultimately has an impact. And getting that balance right, I think, is going to be one of the core challenges. But the seventh, and this is what become one of my obsessions in recent years, is education as a technology domain, which is the how of the teaching learning itself is changing. The teaching learning process itself, technology now, in a very fundamental sense, is intruding into our sphere of work. And we are pretending it's not happening. But as I go around my colleges in Goa, I'm telling my colleagues there that, look, the day is not very far off when the learner in Vasco, with headphones on, she will be able to hear in real time a lecture being delivered in German, in Heidelberg, in organic chemistry. And she'll be able to hear it in Konkani. Now, the point is, and when I say it's not very far off, the time horizon of this is somewhere between the next 10 to 15 years. The technologies exist today, but they're very expensive. And in fact, one of the big challenges for us in terms of public policy in a country like ours is to see how we can make these technologies much cheaper so they're available to everybody. But that's happening. So if you are an organic chemistry teacher in South Goa today, you're not just competing with the other colleges around Vasco. You're competing with this brilliant young professor, assistant professor in Heidelberg in Germany, who delivers lectures in organic chemistry that just completely blow your mind and which completely lay open the thing to you. And everybody's listening to this professor in Germany or wherever. I'm just giving an example, of course. So what does it mean then to be a teacher? Some of us are lucky. I mean, somebody who's my age or, sort of, we sort of will, I'm sure, serve out our time without any of these technological impacts really changing us. But I tell you, anybody who's an assistant professor should be seriously thinking about this. Because, I'm sorry, but your job description has changed. It's probably unfair, but it's changed. And it's changed because of something called technology. So what I want to do now is talk a bit about this technology. And by the way, there are other areas of the expanding domain that I have not touched because, we could go on and on just on the expanding horizons. One example, for instance, is the way in which skills have become increasingly as important, if not more important, than knowledge. And everybody talks about how knowledge and skills are the same thing, blah, blah, blah. They're all interconnected. Well, they're not. Knowledge is know what, skills are know how. And of course, every know what has a know how and every know how has a know what. But let's also be honest about it. Our system has focused on the know what and is not focused on the know how. So, and I could talk about other things as well, but I'm not going to. I want to really focus a bit on technology, and I want to do this by falling back on some work that I have been doing. In fact, work that now has been going on. I was just doing an audit of my life over the last few years. I'm less and less now working in the area of international relations and foreign policy. More and more of my work is now in the domain of sort of technology and education. It sort of happened in very curious ways. When I was Vice Chancellor at the University of Jammu, the very first meeting, the Department of Science and Technology asked me to organize. They wanted to have a meeting in Jammu and Kashmir to kick the process off. So we did that. And then I got sucked into that and, sort of spent a lot of time working on this. So I want to spend a bit of time with your indulgence on the whole Technology Vision 2035 exercise. And I hope that will give you an understanding of how we have conceptualized technology. And I do want to emphasize this point because it's very easy for us to be dismissive of technology. And particularly for social scientists like myself. To say, well, technology is epiphenomenal. The phenomenon are social relations. Technology is one of those things out there. Yeah, sure, it has an impact. So does the weather. So if it doesn't rain, the crops fail. There's social impact. So, it's very easy to sort of treat these things as epiphenomenal. But I want to sort of suggest to you, and we took a very deliberate social science. In fact, I was brought into it precisely to bring a social science perspective into the technology vision for the country. And so we've tried to do that. Now, this is the document that was the base document. This is called Technology Vision 2035. It's available on the website of TIFAC. It's all readily downloadable in PDF. And what we did was, this was not a prediction exercise. So we were not saying this is what is likely to happen. It was not even a foresight exercise. This is what we can envisage. It was not even a projection exercise that given where we are, this is where we will be. This is the way in which we did it. What we did was, we were very clear from the beginning, this is a vision exercise. This is where we would like to be, right? Now, I really do want to emphasize this, because the moment you say it's a vision exercise, the danger is that you're going to have your head up there in the clouds. We can all envision something in a 2035 time frame. We were very conscious of this from the beginning. So we said we've got to anchor ourselves in some reality. And what was that reality? The reality, my friends, is this. These are India's population estimates. The United Nations 2013, they've not substantially been altered since then. Depending on what our population growth rates are, we will be in the year 2035 the largest country in the world, with a population of about 1.48 billion people. Okay, so we said that there are two things we can be certain about. One is that India is and will remain a country of immense size. And the second, and I'm talking about certainty here, because we had to anchor this vision exercise in some real hardcore reality. So we weren't floating out there up in the clouds. And the second was this: India is and will remain a country of immense diversity. So these are the two things we can be certain about when we think about India and we think about India's future. And that is the certitude of massive diversity. That's the only thing we can be certain about in that sort of time frame. But that this will be a massive country and this will be a diverse country, these are the two things that we can absolutely be certain about. So what we said was, therefore, if you're rooting this on population, this is not about India in 2035. It is about Indians in 2035. So let's not talk about an India which exists apart from Indians. This is very, very important. And we, right from the beginning, were very conscious about this. So it's not a landscape, but a peoplescape in some ways. So, when you think about the future of this country, think about the people who live in this country. It's an exercise also, therefore, in taxonomy. It's about classifying these people, this massive, diverse, continent-sized country of ours. And this is what we came up with. We came up with these non-exclusive segments of Indians in 2035. I'll be speaking a bit about this, but broadly speaking, the categories were rooted and remote, left out or left behind, globalized and diaspora, creative, innovative, imaginative, alternative lifestyles and worldviews, and beehives and production lines. And these are non-exclusive, which means that you could belong to definitely more than one of these segments. So if you would sum up the percentages, do read this document again. It's a Sarkari document, so it is having the fate of all Sarkari documents, which is the Prime Minister has written the foreword, released it in 2016. Nobody's reading it. But I urge you, this is a very non-Sarkari document. So, I'm not saying it because I'm one of the three authors of this. I'm saying this because we genuinely worked very hard at making sure this wasn't that type of a document. So this is the exercise in taxonomy. First of all, we have the rooted and remote. These are our compatriots who are rooted by choice. Although some will not have the choice. This is a group that has adherence to old values, but these values will also evolve as the circumstances change. This group will be seen by others not as being backward, which is how a lot of the rooted and remote are seen today, but as emblematic of the good old days. This has happened in a range of other countries as well. where today those who work in the countryside are not seen as backward. They are in fact seen as the custodians of traditional values. If you go to Japan, you go to France, the farmer in the field is a heroic, valorized character. Why? Because it's seen that the roots of the culture come from that, even though they are only 15% of the population. So this is the point which we suspect by 2035 is going to be happening in our country too. The danger is, of course, that they can become cultural exhibits, and we need to also recognize that the notion of remoteness itself would have changed by 2035. What does it mean to be remote? Why? Because there would be road connectivity to every village. There would be internet connectivity to every household by then. So in a way, when we talk about rooted and remote, the notion of remoteness itself would have changed. There would be physical connectivity, there would be virtual connectivity by then. So, we have to even begin to think about what does it mean to be rooted and remote in the 2035 time frame. The second kind of very important thing, the group segment of our population will be the globalized and diaspora. Indians would be the largest diaspora community in the world by 2035. The government of India would have to devote considerable resources to cater to this segment, and they would have to deploy these resources worldwide. Comparisons across countries would be routine for this group, for obvious reasons. You live in California half the year and you live in, Bengaluru half the year. You will end up comparing, the two. So, in other words, there's now going to be a significant segment of our population, extremely articulate, mostly extremely wealthy. Some are Indian citizens, some are not. Mostly residing outside India, but also having substantial roots within India. And this is going to become a very, very important segment of our population. The notion of best practices, therefore, would become commonplace, which is today just used as kind of a random term. It's going to become very serious. The concept of citizenship itself would be transformed in some fundamental sense. And this segment would be, as I've just said, extremely assertive about its rights, would have a strong sense of entitlement, and would not be hesitant to hold the government accountable for all sorts of ills. Whether they are real, whether they are imagined, it doesn't really matter. But this is going to become a second very critical segment of our population. Third are the left out or left behind. And this is what our thought on the matter is. Despite much greater openness and many improvements, India would continue to be an unequal society in which many would simply not get a chance in the first place or would not be able to keep up with the pace of change. So there'll be the left outs and the left behinds. And the system would therefore have to be acutely sensitive about inclusion issues. When we talk about quality today, we talk about access. And we see them in some ways as being antipodal. They cannot be. We have to build a system that is simultaneously a mass system, but a system that is also quality conscious. Recognizing that there is a trade-off between the two. There is necessarily a trade-off in education between quality and access. But a trade-off just means you've got to make choices. You cannot abandon either of them. We have to be inclusive, but we also have to focus on quality. Because if we don't do that, what we're going to find is that those who come from privileged and elite backgrounds will get quality education, the others will not. So that's the reason why, as I see it, access and quality really have to go necessarily in a country like ours hand in hand. The fourth group that we've talked about, the fourth segment of the population, are alternate lifestyles and worldviews. These are those who would choose to opt out of the system, who will advocate and pursue alternate lifestyles, who will have radically different ideas about society and the good life, right? And a sensible system would not interfere with their choices, but would nonetheless seek to remain engaged with this segment. This may seem a bit esoteric, but if you think about India, it's not at all esoteric. In our millennial civilization, there's always been a place for the sadhu. And they've always been a part and parcel of our society. They've always been, right? So this is one example of an alternate lifestyle and worldview. Somebody who just walks away from family and commitments and gets onto another track. This country has, for millennia, had a place for these people in our society. And we think that this group is going to be, by 2035, about 15% of the population. So any system of public policy, any system that is genuine about education is going to have to engage with this group. And there's one reason for this. Social benefits can accrue from individual mavericks. That, we should not be obsessed about conformity. That's one of the real banes of our system. We want everybody to look alike. But real social benefits come from those who live on the margins. Very often it's those who lead marginal lives who end up doing very, very interesting things. In fact, I would urge you to go and read the biographies of some of the remarkable individuals who've been decorated with the Padma Shri just yesterday in the Republic Day list. It's an amazing group of people, and it really sort of shows you about the work that's being done, the amazing transformatory work that is being done on the margins of our society. And it's really great that at last, the absolute, those in power are beginning to recognize that the sheer transformatory potential of those who live in the margins. And some of them are really, really remarkable individuals. You read their bios and you just end up feeling humble. It's like, what have I done with my life? In comparison to some of these people. So I think this is the fourth segment of the population. The fifth is what we call creative, innovative, and imaginative. These are the individuals who refuse to be constrained by the straitjacket imposed by the system. They are a much needed sector for us because innovation will emerge largely from this sector of the population. And although this segment is small in size, it is going to be critical to the health of the country because it's going to be the fount of economic and social dynamism. And finally, sixth is what we call the beehives and production lines, which is about the productive process. It's the source of all resources. It underlies all social existence. It would all be due to this segment. A vast majority of our population, we estimated about 55% by 2035. And catering to their needs, keeping them skilled, satisfied, and involved would be the biggest challenge for the system. Those who are actually producing, how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them satisfied? One of the things I'm saying as I'm going around my colleges in Goa, and in Goa this is particularly relevant what I'm about to say, is that we've got to stop thinking that our client group falls between the ages of 18 and 24, which is what all of us think, that, who do we cater to? We cater to those who fall between the ages of 18 and 24. No longer. In our society, people are now living into their 80s and 90s, which means there are people now who are going to be living for 2 or 3 decades after they retire. What are we as an education system doing to cater to their needs? Why do we not see them as a very relevant client group for us? I think we have to begin to get serious about this. Let me give you just one small example about this that I've been talking about a bit these days. The best way for a 60-year-old human brain to not start atrophying and to remain vibrant, the best way to do that is to learn a new language. If at the age of 60 you dedicate yourself to learning a new language, but learning it with sincerity, really becoming good at that language, you renew your brain, for another 30 years. It's amazing. The biology of this is so clear. Actually at the age of 60, 65, people are building new neuronal networks and connections in their brains when they started learning a new language. So here's a classic example. We as institutions of learning have got to start catering to this segment, providing those opportunities. And that cannot be something which is a peripheral activity. It has to begin to be regarded by us as a core activity. And then, moving on, what we said was ultimately, the way we saw it, this was about certain prerogatives. Prerogatives is a very strong word. Why don't you sit down? It's making me feel as if I'm speaking at Army War College or something, where there's always a Havaldar who's standing next to me, and I also tell him also, "Yeah, baith jaiye. Havaldar sahab, baith jaiye." So just relax. If I need you, you're right here. So prerogatives, namely, these are claims that the citizen can legitimately make upon the state. These are claims, and we've divided them into 6 that are individual prerogatives and 6 that are collective. I'm just going to quickly rattle them out for you. The individual prerogatives are clean air and potable water. I'm a Delhi wala, so believe me, I understand what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter if you're a multi-millionaire. You can be a crorepati many times over if you're living in Delhi. Just living in Delhi means you're smoking the equivalent of 4 to 6 cigarettes every day. It's shocking. So what's the point being a crorepati? I'm so happy that I'm a refugee in Goa these days. But that's the first. The second is food and nutritional security. Universal health care and public hygiene, 24/7 electricity, decent habitat, and quality education, livelihood, and creative opportunities. These are the 6 prerogatives that we say every Indian citizen has a claim to as an individual. But there are 6 other prerogatives that are collective. Safe and speedy mobility, public safety and national security, cultural diversity and vibrancy, transparent and effective governance, disaster and climate resilience, and finally, but not finally, eco-friendly conservation of natural resources. So we say these are 12 claims that by the year 2035, every Indian citizen will be able to make upon the state. And it's going to be the obligation of those in power, obligations of those who hold public authority to create the conditions for this to happen. And for this to happen, you need technology. Without technology, it's not going to happen. And we also, therefore, at the end of this document, came up with what we call the grand challenges. We said that there are certain grand technology challenges that we need to place before the country. And I'm glad to say that of these challenges, at least 7 of them are now being very seriously tackled. Sometimes you write a document but it does actually become a part of policy. It's been one of the most gratifying aspects of having been involved in this process. The number 1 technology challenge, we said, was guaranteeing nutritional security and eliminating female and child anemia. Indian women and Indian girls are chronically anemic, which means that most Indian women, and it doesn't matter what social strata you come from, they are, by some biomedical fact, they are anemic. And this we said was the number 1 technology challenge for the country. Number 2 was ensuring quantity and quality of water in all rivers and aquatic bodies. Third was securing critical resources commensurate with the size of our country. This is actually an incredibly important challenge. There are many resources that India is a country which is rich in resources, except when you factor in the immense size of our population. When you factor in the immense size of our population, we actually are resource deficient. We have petroleum in our country, yet we spend a huge amount of money importing, hydrocarbons from abroad. Now, that's not because we don't have petroleum in our country, but it's nowhere near what you need. So it's securing critical resources commensurate with the size of our country. And we've placed it as the 3rd technology challenge. 4th is providing learner-centric, language-neutral, and holistic education to all. My friends, we thought about every single word in this document. We spent, I think, about half a day discussing just how we're going to put this particular challenge. Learner-centric, first of all. Language-neutral. Let's get rid of this aristocracy of language, where if you're fluent in written and spoken English, you're king. And if you somehow are not fluent in written and spoken English, you're immediately being, reduced to a second class. It's a fact, it's a brutal reality in our country. So it's learner-centric, language-neutral, and holistic education for all. This, we said, was the 4th technology challenge. And I hope, in the time I have to show you why it is a technology challenge, why we cannot deal with it in non-technological ways. Fifth is understanding national climate patterns and adapting to them. Sixth is making India non-fossil fuel based. It's a huge technology challenge. Seven, this was an engineering challenge, but we felt we had to put at least one of them in this. And this is taking the railway to Leh and Tawang. So we said, drill into the Great Himalayas. It's ridiculous that there are parts of our country which do not have railway connectivity. And Leh and Tawang are so strategically important to our country. We should have a railway train going right up to there. Now it's happening. So we're going to have Indian Railways are doing some amazing work out there in terms of taking the railway there. Eighth is ensuring location and ability independent electoral and financial empowerment. What this means, in just one simple sentence, is we need to get to a day where we don't have to all line up in a polling booth in order to vote. That we should be able to vote from our own homes, and it should be in a way in which it's completely secure technologically. Nobody can steal our vote. Nobody can tamper with the vote, etc., etc., etc. So that's going to be a critical challenge. This idea about elections carrying on, general elections carrying on for months on end. And why did it carry on for months on end? It's because of the logistical challenge of moving security forces from one part of this continent to another part of this continent. You need the security forces in order to have free and fair elections. So imagine if we didn't have to actually have a system where people had to physically go out to a particular place to vote, but they could each exercise the vote from where they were. It would fundamentally transform our country. So this is kind of, and the same also applies to financial empowerment equally. And we've all experienced it actually with internet banking to an extent. But, to go much, much more seriously about that. The ninth is developing commercially viable, decentralized and distributed energy for all. And the 10th challenge was ensuring universal eco-friendly waste management. So 12 prerogatives, 10 grand challenges. But then what we also did was we came up with 12 sectoral reports. So we picked up different sectors and we worked on the sectoral reports. As you can see, one of the sectors is education, number 10. I was the principal author and chaired that report as well. So apart from this main vision document, I took the lead on the education one as well. So 6 of the 12 reports are out: medical science and healthcare, materials, manufacturing, education, transportation, and information and communication technologies. The 6 reports that sectoral reports we are still waiting for, we call them sectoral roadmaps, are energy, water, environment, food and agriculture, infrastructure, and habitat. So these are the 6 that are still being awaited. Again, these are all available on the website. Please feel free to go in to take a look at them. Not just education, some of the other reports are wonderful also. I particularly enjoyed reading the medical sciences and healthcare report. I thought it was really, really interesting the way they looked at the whole issue. And those among you who are sort of in the hard sciences, the materials report, I think you'll find, the roadmap you'll also find to be very fascinating. Okay. I'm now going to be focusing on this technology roadmap for education. And the rest of my talk is really going to be about this. Okay. There are basically 5 axiomatic propositions. 5 axiomatic propositions that underline this exercise of ours. To look at how education, society, and technology intersect. The first of them is to say the following, that in human and social terms, our country is the sum total of all its generations, those past, those living, and those yet to come. Hence, empowering Indians empowers India. You cannot have a powerful India with disempowered Indians. You have to empower Indians in order to have an empowered India. The second proposition, and these are all axiomatic, which means we're not out to prove them. We're just stating them and saying that these are the truth. If you question any of these axioms, then obviously you're questioning the entire basis of our report, right? Second is, by enhancing individual possibilities, education leads to social transformation and to national advancement. Third, technology is socially constructed and in turn shapes and transforms society. So technology doesn't exist in some abstract space. Technology is socially constructed. But in turn, technology shapes and transforms society. Fourth, public policy choices will determine whether educational technologies function as barriers or levelers. A lot of technologies in education which exist today are priced out of the possibility of most Indians. So this is a public policy choice. Are we going to make these technologies available so that differences in society get leveled and everybody rises, or are we going to create them as barriers? It's a public policy choice. And fifth, in an era of rapid technological change, we must work hard to keep pace or risk rapidly falling behind. So the way we put it, there isn't an option here, or there is an option, and that option is agreeing to exist at a technologically lower equilibrium. We don't think it's a choice. We don't think it's a choice. You can't have an enemy like China sitting on your northern borders that's technologically upgrading its entire society, and envisage that you're going to be able to continue to be free if, there's a huge technological gulf between China and India, for example. So what we also do in this roadmap is that we consciously try to bridge some gaps. For instance, the gap between tradition, the indigenous knowledge systems, and innovation, which is cutting edge futuristic research, between the world of learning and the world of work, between knowledge, the point I already made, know what, and skills, which is know-how, between mainstream and vocational education, this very, very artificial divide that we have created, between education as instrument and education as value, between knowledge production and knowledge transmission, namely between research and teaching, between teaching and learning, between the disciplines, between different levels of education. This society runs a school as well as an undergraduate college. What are the connectivities between the two? And I don't just mean institutional connectivities, I mean knowledge connectivities. I think we need to ask those searching questions. Okay, why 2035? As I've told you, this was kind of a technology vision that was based on an early exercise that was done by TIFAC called Technology Vision 2020. This was completed in 1998. At that time, Dr. Abdul Kalam was the chair of TIFAC. That's just before he became president of India. And so the 2020 exercise had been a completely different approach. That had been about looking at different sectors. It was completely sectoral. It was very technocratic. This time, TIFAC, when this exercise was done, it was headed by Dr. Anil Kakodkar, who, of course, all Mumbaikars know, is one of them. So Dr. Anil Kakodkar was by that time the head of TIFAC. And that's when, as I told you, we took this radically different approach, which was to not see it in sectoral terms, but to see it in social terms. So, it's not like we haven't done the sectoral exercise. We've looked at the sectoral, the sectoral roadmaps. But our starting point is society. So 2035 in some ways is a generic date. But yet, for those of us who are interested in education, there is a genuine historical significance of 2035. And that is linked to this man. Some of you will recognize him. This is Thomas Babington Macaulay, who on the 2nd of February in 1835, in his famous Minute on Education, said the following: "We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect." Now this one single sentence encapsulates British imperial policy with regards to education of this continent called India. Okay? So what we said was, we are envisioning 2035, 2 centuries from Macaulay. What is the vision that we are going to have for our country that can be really in some ways counterposed and contrasted to the Macaulay vision of India? And we came up with this: achieving the full potential of every Indian. That is the education technology vision for the country. I can say this because this is a Sarkari document. It's been accepted by the government of India. The Prime Minister has written the foreword. So we can work on the assumption that, therefore, the government is serious, is articulating this. I'm a political scientist. I'm very skeptical about governments in general, but the articulation of visions is extremely important. Extremely important. Macaulay's Minute shaped, for better or worse, Indian education for the past 2 centuries. Both the content of the education and the language in which this education is being transmitted. So, if we are coming up with an alternate vision, this is the vision: achieving the full potential of every Indian. That's what we've got to aim at. And we got to therefore ask, use that as the starting point, and that's got to be your test. Is this enhancing this? Or is it creating impediments to for every Indian to achieve his or her full potential? Then, in the report itself, I won't go into this. We talk about the current landscape of education in contemporary India. It's the only part where we look at sort of, the situation today. We decided we were not going to do too much of that, because if you get too anchored in today's reality, you cannot come up with a vision at all. So we said, look, we've got to say, this is where we are today, this is where we want to be, how do you get from A to B? Let's start talking about that in serious ways. But so, but it's several people who've read the report have come and told us that they really enjoyed this section, even though this is not the heart of the report. But in a very succinct way, we've tried to summarize what the situation is today. Then we talk about Indians in 2035, educational aspirations, and we basically link it to, you remember the taxonomy of 6 categories of Indians, the 6 segments that we had. We added 2 more segments from an education perspective to make it 8 segments. The first of these segments was, again, the rooted and remote. The second segment was your globalized and diaspora. The third segment was the dropouts and late bloomers, a very, very important category. I can't get into it in any detail, but this is Paul Cézanne. Paul Cézanne was the ultimate late bloomer. Basically, today, one of the most highly, the most expensive works of art. But in his lifetime, basically, he was seen as being useless. It's because he took his entire life to actually become good at what he did. Unlike, say, Pablo Picasso, who from the very first thing he ever did became famous, And so, unfortunately, we have a system of education where those whose productivity and creativity and potential is immediately apparent are the ones who benefit. And the others who are there, who will develop only a little later on in life, they tend to be ignored by us. The fourth is the category we call left out and left behind. Fifth, unfortunately, we have not been able to get an Indian picture on this, an authentic picture in a classroom. What we call the second chances or double dips, those who sort of basically, want to get back to formal education. We want an India like this. We want an India where in our classrooms there are some elderly people also who are sitting out there. Imagine how rich those classrooms would be. If actually we had people coming back, in their 60s and 70s to do a degree. And they were sitting with youngsters, and just think about how different the whole tenor of the classroom would be. So that's one of the things we feel we need to go for. Then the alternate lifestyles and worldviews, the sadhus that I talked about. Then your creative, innovative, and imaginative, and finally, beehives and production lines. So I won't go into this in any great detail, but we again looked at it in a segmentary kind of way. And we said for each of these segments, the educational needs are different, so the system therefore has to cater to these differentiated needs. Literacy, creativity, and skills. We actually came up, this is one of the most, I think, important contributions from my point of view of our document, was that we said that that old reading, the 3 R's approach to literacy has to go out of the window now. And we've come up with a very different kind of a system: reading, writing, and communication, numeracy, digital proficiency. Our argument is that today, if you cannot use a device, to that extent you are illiterate. And therefore, in some ways, much of the elderly generation in our country is illiterate, because they struggle with devices, and more things are happening on those devices, right? Then visual and symbolic proficiency. Again, actually, one of the things that globalization and the digital world has done is that the visual symbols are again coming into play. And some people can understand these symbols and others can't. And the fifth category, which we thought was fundamental to literacy, is what we call civic awareness. That now civic awareness is also as much a part of a basic understanding of literacy as everything else. I won't get into this. It's a fairly detailed thing. Those of you who are interested in this, we actually came up with what we call a little literacy wheel, which actually indicates how we need to think about literacy. But I won't get into that. It'll just take too much time. Then we have a section which is about ensuring access, which we call the 3 A's: anyone, anywhere, anytime. Then we have a section that sort of is mainstreaming vocational education, reimagining lifelong learning. And I think this is again where we have, I think, come up with some rather interesting ideas. Then we have a whole section on quality, because obviously that's one of the big obsessions of our system today. Then employability, entrepreneurship, and livelihood security, where we sort of try to look at the interconnect between the world of learning and the world of work. How do you make that transition, and so on. Culture, recreation, and the good life. Many people who have read this report have said that they have loved this section. So some of you, I hope, will read it and let us know whether you love it or not. I think we worked very hard on sort of trying to say that education was ultimately about this. This is what education is about. When you think about education as values, it's about culture, it's about relaxation, it's about the good life. And what do you mean by the good life? We've tried to sort of understand, unpack that notion of the good life. We've linked it to sports, we've linked it to culture, and we've sort of seen how these are fundamentally interconnected. Research, innovation, and product development. And then we come to a section which we call the technological future of education. That, in a way, was the heart of the report. So you can just see how different these reports are from earlier reports, where it would have been, this would have been the report. We have just talked about the technology, and that would have been it. And that's not. In this report, it's really just one section in the entire report. So a lot of people have read the report and said that, the technology is not missing, but it's not just about technology. And we said that's because please go back to it's about the intersection of education, society, and technology. It's how the three intersect. That is what we need to sort of figure out and support, right? I won't get into these details, but they got a whole bunch of technologies, and it's all there in the report. With this part, we are talking about technology, hardcore technology. So there's ICT, there's artificial intelligence technologies, there's display and user interface technologies. I'm just running through this: internet technologies, computational technologies, simulation and modeling technologies. All of these technologies play a role. I won't get into it because it just is going to take too much time. But I'll be happy to sort of I'll be happy if you'd actually read the report, because it's all there. Then we talk about emerging knowledgescapes and institutional architectures. This we felt was something we needed to focus on, because one of the very radical claims we had made in the main report was the following, and I'm repeating the sentence textually. We wrote, schools, colleges, and universities, as currently constituted, will be redundant by 2035. It's a very strong statement. I assure you, we spent 8 hours one day debating on the word redundant. Did we mean redundant? Did we mean something else? Everybody was involved in this, spoke at length, and we came up with the conclusion that the word we were seeking was redundant. Which is not to say that schools, colleges, and universities will cease to exist. What it means is that by 2035, if they remain in the business as usual mode, they will no longer be serving a useful social purpose. So we will exist. I mean, we all have tenure, we all have jobs, we'll keep getting our monthly salaries, life will go on. But the social purpose of houses of learning would have evaporated by then. We'd just be shells. But the other critical term is as currently constituted. So we can think about how we can reconstitute ourselves, how we can actually, re-architecture ourselves so that we remain socially relevant. And again, I won't get into this in any detail, but we talk here about mode 1 and mode 2. There are certain we've been very much in the mode 1, organizationally hierarchical and form preserving. Universities last forever. Universities last forever. The college in Oxford where I was a student had been created in 1379. 1379. It's existed since then. The college at which I was a faculty member at Oxford had been created in 1427. Universities last forever. Institutions of learning don't die. Nalanda existed for 700 years till the forces of Khilji came and destroyed Nalanda. And burning those manuscripts apparently went up in the sky. For a month the skies were lit just because of the manuscripts. So the fact is otherwise universities last. But the secret about a place like Oxford lasting is that it has continuously reinvented itself. Oxford started out in the early Middle Ages, really, in the 1027 kind of time frame, as a place where monks got an education. It was basically a seminary, a place for monks. But it continuously reinvented itself and remains one of the great universities of the world today. So that's the point. So we need to move from being organizationally hierarchical and form preserving to being organizationally heterarchical and transient. How do we do that? That's the challenge. Can we think about how we can be socially relevant in non-brick and mortar ways? That's the challenge. And the problem is, those who fund higher education, they have dealt with this in a way which is extremely subversive, which is to say that we are no longer going to allow you to recruit permanent faculty. I've been lucky, both in Jammu and Kashmir and in Goa, I have not faced this problem. But, we vice chancellors, we do form a community. We are a sangat, and we do talk to each other, and we do share issues. And across the board, you find in state after state after state, as faculty members are superannuating, their posts are not being filled. And we've replaced them with temporary faculty. And I'm sorry, there's a new kind of exploitative division of labor that now exists in higher education in our country, where you belong to the aristocracy with permanent jobs, and the bulk of the work is being done by the contractual teachers who have no security of tenure, who have nothing. So I'm very conscious about this. I consider it as one of the fundamental ills of our system today, something that I think as a collectivity, the vice chancellors and presidents and directors need to focus on and figure out solutions to. But I'm not therefore talking about, when I say transient, about having people just on short-term contracts. That's not what I mean. But I mean structurally, how can we be organizationally transient? For instance, how can you tackle a code issue, say in Mumbai, which is during the monsoons, the flooding of the city, right? It's an annual problem. It's linked to monsoon rains and high tides and the fact that waterways have been blocked. What are the ways in which we as institutions of learning can actually contribute to that? That's the point. It's not something which it cannot be our sole purpose. It cannot be something which we do all the time. But can we come up with structures whereby it's possible to tackle in concrete terms a problem like that using knowledge? That's the point. That's our strong suit. It's knowledge. And we have in our houses of learning all the knowledge that you could possibly ever need to tackle any social problem. We don't have to look outside. So the basic thing what we try to suggest in this report, and I won't go into any greater detail, but in some ways it suggests that we need to start thinking about mode 2. So, accountability not just in normative and disciplinary terms. Every discipline having its own protocols of accountability. Normative terms, no cheating in examinations. No vice chancellor will ever say that, no, I'll permit cheating in exams. Obviously. It goes without saying. So I'm not saying we're throwing out mode 1, but you've got to bring in mode 2, socially accountable and reflexive. How do we bring social accountability and reflexivity into our institutions? That's the architectural challenge. That's the design challenge. Okay? So we have a whole section that focuses on this. Shaping an enabling environment for knowledge and skills. And then we have a table which sort of looks at these maps. There's all maps at all, the various technologies, the various segments of Indians, etc., etc. I won't get into any of that. Okay. Now, I could either stop right now, or if I carry on, it's going to take another 10 minutes. The choice is entirely yours, Principal Ma'am. Huh? So because I mean, this will be a good inflection point. At this stage, you got an idea about the reports. Now, what I'll do is I'm going to then go and talk a bit about summing it up. What are some of the key points of emphasis that emerge out of our report? First, and I think this is very important for us, we have identified predetermined content as the biggest bane of the Indian education system. That academic bureaucrats decide what will and will not be learnt, what will and will not be taught, not the learner. That is our single biggest problem, predetermined content. So even the teacher does not have the choice of deciding what is to be taught. This is something which is being determined in a fairly bureaucratic setting. It's also a democratic setting, paradoxically. It's called the Board of Study, right? It is actually a democratic setting. It's our own. It belongs to us. But we all know how boards of studies function. The lowest common denominator kind of logic in boards of studies. It's all about negotiating away all the troublesome topics, and try as much as to continue to do what you've been doing for the last 15 years. It differs from discipline to discipline, obviously. There are some disciplines which are very, very, very conscious about what's the latest research and are trying to incorporate it, but there are other disciplines that are frankly not. So this is the key point. So one of the other things it brings into the foreseeable future technologies and considers their impact on education, access, quality, skilling, assessment, management. It proposes to reposition education to prepare learners for life and not work, but also for easy absorption of life skills. Suggests modular certification in higher education, facilitated through easy exit and re-entry. So instead of having these fixed packages of time, we'll create a system where there's much greater fluidity. People enter the world of learning, go to the world of work, come back again. We just have a much more flexible system. The report suggests that education should not be solely for the head, but also for the heart, namely value education, and for the hands, which is vocational education. This is, of course, something which is linked to Mahatma Gandhi's idea of the Nai Talim, which was a great idea, but which never took root in our country, unfortunately, except in very, very, kind of different institutions. It proposes that sports, culture, and value education are seamlessly intertwined and should be encouraged in order to attain the good life. It projects a reinvented role for the teacher. This is an important point, my colleagues, because this is the thing that really sort of worried us. What happens to the teacher? So we've projected a reinvented role for the teacher. We see the future of the teacher as a facilitator, a pathfinder, a navigator, a counselor, a confidant, rather than as an instructor. When all the content is there, it's out there, it's available, the question is, how do you guide the learner? How do you get the learner to understand that, look, instead of reading this, why don't you take a look at this? This will give you a much better understanding of all of this. But, you're focusing too much on only one perspective. You need to, that kind of role of pathfinder and navigator is one that increasingly has to be played by the teacher, particularly in higher education. It's, we have to still think about how this will be played out at sort of, the secondary and, earlier levels of education. It emphasizes adaptability and change resilience of teachers to face the onslaught of technology and the constantly, evolving new roles. So it's being a teacher today is extremely difficult. We say this very clearly in the report, that, when knowledge gets changing so rapidly, how do you actually teach? And so adaptability and change resilience, the teachers being able to do that, needs a much more organic way of retraining in the process of working than the kind of academic staff college or human resource development center kind of model that we have evolved, So we have to think about that also extremely seriously. One of the other things we say, it's one of the few concrete policy recommendations we make in the report. On the whole, we stayed away from concrete policy recommendations. We pointed out issues, but we said, these are things that people need to debate and come up with. One of the positive recommendations we made was to propose ring fencing of teacher training from the private sector. In other words, keep the private sector out of teacher training. B.Ed, etc. We said that this is far too important for it to be done by the private sector. Otherwise, private sector involvement in education, most welcome, except in teacher training. That somehow we feel should be a function of the state. It should be the responsible of the public sector, of the state, to train people to become teachers. That should not be left to the private sector. And I say this partly from my experience as having been the Vice Chancellor of the University of Jammu. I had 157 colleges, 79 of them were education colleges of education. We had to struggle with the malpractices that were there in this sector of education. There were students from Orissa and from the south who had taken admission to do B.Ed, who came once to pay the fees and who basically then turned up to sit for the examinations. It was so difficult, particularly in a mountainous state where logistics are difficult, to actually ensure that classes were actually being held in these institutions. So I mean, we felt as a group, we discussed this with many stakeholders, and we made the recommendation. We envisaged the technological possibilities of completely unleashing education for the first time, making it genuinely, anywhere, anyone, anytime. We talk about translational research, product development as a means to enhance innovation of learners. It's actually a very interesting idea. It came from Dr. Anil Kakodkar. And the idea is that students should be encouraged to come up and try to create at least one innovative thing. It could be an idea, it could be a piece of literature, whatever, while they are students themselves. That, one thing which is not based on knowledge of others, but which is something actually genuinely original of theirs, right? It foresees learners seeking second or third careers and also short span careers. I already talked about this, the 60 pluses who need to now get into our classrooms, ease of access of technology, longer lifespans, obsolescence as well. Technology itself is making people incapable of continuing to be productive. So how can we contribute to keeping them technologically savvy? It reflects on learner-paced, personalized education, adaptive learning, and adaptive assessment. It foresees the transformation of the university. I already talked about it a bit in Mode 1 and Mode 2, into what we call a multiversity. It flags exponential changes due to technology that will force educational institutions to reinvent and recalibrate themselves. And then we get to the grand challenges, but I'm not going to get into that. I think we have 5 grand challenges, but it'll take me far too long to sort of actually develop them, and I don't want to just go and just mention them. It would just be that. So let me sum up. What we are saying is, in fact, let me get to the very end, because I think we do say something out there that will be relevant. I won't get into this, but we come up and we finally say that we come up with 5 technology challenges, but then we say that there are 2 challenges which are non-technological in nature, which also must be treated as a grand challenge. One of them I've already talked about, which is bridging the divide between curricular, non-curricular, and extracurricular learning. That learning is learning. Those NCC cadets, they are learning something. And we should not treat this as some kind of additional activity. That is learning, and we need to give it exactly the same status in our institutions as we give the stuff that's happening within classrooms and laboratories, right? But the other thing is making teacher training the keystone of educational reform. We see this as a grand challenge. We don't think it's really a technology challenge. It's more an attitudinal challenge. But how do we completely transform teacher training in our country? Because we are very clear, it's, without the active involvement of teachers, we are not going to have positive social transformation. And you're certainly not going to have any kind of positive transformation of the educational system. And though the talk was on the expanding horizons of higher education, I think those of us who are in higher education must also recognize we are snobs when it comes to teachers at other levels of education. We look down upon them. We've created in our country a system where university teachers look down on college teachers. College teachers look down on secondary school teachers. Secondary school teachers look down on middle school teachers. And the ones who do the most difficult work of all, the primary school teachers, we all look down upon them. And until we change that, until we begin to understand that there's nothing more challenging than taking this first-time learner, this child, and making them recognize the full potential, we are never going to be able to do any of the other stuff we talk about. So teacher training, that's the keystone of reform. Sorry I've spoken longer than you wanted me to, ma'am. But you know what we teachers are like. We either speak for half an hour or for 1.5 hours. So, thank you very much.